Ty, I've never introduced a guest this way before, but I am so glad that you exist.
Well, thank you. That's a really nice way to start off.
I am this person that you study and write about. I am and have always been awkward.
Huh.
My girlfriend would make fun of me, but lovingly, that when we would go, she always admired that we would go to a party, for example. We were at a social event, and I had no idea how to insert myself into a conversation. You know how some people can just sidle up to a conversation and just join in, and it's not awkward or weird or anything. And I'd never known how to do that. And so what I do is I stand in the middle of the room, or to the side, but sometimes in the middle, completely by myself, holding my drink, just watching everybody. And weirdly, I'm totally comfortable doing it, but my God, it's awkward for everybody else. And it's awkward for me too. But I've just gotten used to it.
I know exactly I know exactly what you're talking about, Simon. So you're in good company today.
What's your journey? How did you start studying awkwardness?
Well, I guess real life experience, if we go all the way back. So I was a super awkward kid. And I mean, I'm still awkward now, kind of recovered awkward, or well coped awkward, I guess. But yeah, gosh, if you knew me when I was a kid, especially at junior high is awkward for everybody, of course. For me, it was particularly difficult and bewildering. Probably, like you said, a little bit awkward for other people as well. So yeah, that's kind of where it all began, was just with life. And then I had some friends who had moved to new cities. It just so happened at this point in time, this was like 2014, I think, a lot of my friends who had moved just happened to be socially awkward as well. And one of the things I like to do is go visit people when they're new to a city. It's always a hard thing to do. And I'd go visit these friends, and I'd watch them at parties or at bars or whatever else. Stand there holding their drink, sometimes on the side or in the middle, and they would start talking to somebody new, and it would just be heartbreaking because they'd be awkward, and the other person would excuse themselves politely. I gotta go get a drink, or I gotta go do something they really didn't have to do. And I gotta say, it just really broke my heart, because I thought, I'm sad for my friend who, these were all really great people who were super interesting, tremendous character. And I thought it's really tough to watch them struggle socially. But then I thought it's too bad for the other person too, because they made a 2 or 3 minute decision on whether they wanted to be interested in this person or not. And now they're missing out on one of the most interesting people they could possibly become friends with. So that was where it all started, was just this kind of pain for, this empathic pain for my friends. But then also thinking, gosh, why aren't other people more understanding of where the awkward person is coming from? And it kind of led to this question for me. It solidified in this way. I thought, maybe if socially awkward people could skip the first 5 minutes of conversation, they'd actually be all right.
Yes.
Because it's the small talk and the minutia that they really struggle with.
Yes. I struggle with small talk. I struggle with minutia. My dating for years. Dating was awful because I didn't know how to, the awkwardness at the beginning. And then I find myself overcompensating, What's the correlation between extroversion, introversion, and awkwardness, or is there none? You're just either, awkward and shy or awkward and outgoing. Is it just,
Yeah, well, that turns out to be, very interesting, Simon, because there is a small correlation between awkwardness and introversion, which I kind of think would fit most people's stereotype or assumption. But it's not as strong as you would think it would be. And in fact, you do have, on the opposite end, people who are really awkward and super extroverted. So one of the ways I like to think about awkwardness is it's just never in the middle of the bell curve. You're, in this case, pretty shy and really introverted, or it could be that you're really extroverted, but maybe that kind of uncontrolled extroversion where you're a little too much and overwhelming for other folks if you don't moderate it.
I think this is interesting. I've always liked Susan Cain's definition of introversion and extroversion, which is about energy. Like introverts lose energy being social, and extroverts gain energy being social. Put another way, an introvert wakes up in the morning with 5 coins, and every social interaction they have, they spend a coin, and by the end they're depleted. And an extrovert wakes up with no coins. Every social interaction they have, they get a coin. By the end, they feel rich.
Yes, exactly.
And to your point, it's not about social awkwardness. There are socially awkward introverts and socially unawkward introverts, and there's socially awkward extroverts and socially unawkward extroverts. So
yes.
What I appreciate is that you're defining this new category that's not about energy or social or introversion or extroversion, but this new thing called awkwardness. So the people who aren't awkward, what should we be studying in them? Like, is there this innate, or is there a skill that they have that even though it may not be innate for me, that I can actually practice it and get better?
Yes. Yeah, exactly. So these non-awkward folks, I like to call them socially fluent. Because sometimes I think about awkwardness, if someone's not awkward, it's kind of hard to explain what's going on in your mind, and I say it's kind of like trying to speak in your second language. It's just harder to decipher what's going on. There's that clumsiness. And then also when it comes to conveying to other people what you're trying to get across, you just kind of have to think about the details more, and it's just more arduous. And sometimes it doesn't come out quite right. Right. So I think about folks who are not awkward as socially fluent. And yes, awkward folks can learn a tremendous amount. And, one of the secrets, I think.
I may not get fluent, but I can be somewhat conversational.
That's right. That's right. And you could even fool people, right? So you're proficient, let's say, but you catch people in the right situation on the right day, and they're like, hey, you're doing great. For example, I'm sure you get this all the time. If you tell people that you're awkward, people might have seen your public-facing side, and that's all they know about you. Yeah. And then there's almost this disbelief, like, Simon, you're not awkward. You're like, no, I actually really am at my core. But when it comes to, say, something like public speaking, you learned the skills and you honed them to such a degree that it would actually be hard for people to know that you're awkward.
I have to say, when people say, oh, Simon, how can you be socially awkward? You stand on the stage, blah, blah, blah. But what they forget is that when I get off the stage, first of all, when I'm on the stage, I'm not talking to anybody. I'm not interacting,
Right.
But when I come off the stage, people do all the talking at me. Oh, I love what you said. That was great. And I just stand there saying thank you or answering questions, but I'm actually not having to come up with anything.
That's right.
So it actually is actually it makes my life actually a lot easier, weirdly,
Yeah, I totally get that.
My social awkwardness has been mitigated.
Absolutely. And you have quite a bit of control in that scenario, right? The public speaking, you can actually prepare for that and have some control over that. When it comes to people asking you questions, you'll get new ones that you haven't heard before, but you know your material, and so you're the kind of the subject matter expert. That's the way it goes for observing socially fluent people. I always tell socially fluent folks, awkward people are watching you, and hopefully it's not in a creepy kind of way. Yeah. But I know certainly when I was a kid, I would observe people I respected for their social skill and how they interacted with others, and would just study how they greeted people, how they responded, how they held their posture, and then in the privacy of my own home, would practice some of these things so I could try to gain some of that skill.
What were some of the things that you practiced so you could gain those skills? What are some of the specific things that you practiced?
Yeah, so a lot of things. One thing was personal space. My default, Simon, is to stand too far away from people. So in the United States, it's about 18, 19 inches of personal space is just about right. I'd stand about 24 inches away, which makes you feel oddly distant and it's kind of uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And so, I would watch even how close people stood to other folks. I would watch, I have a hard time with eye contact by nature. and I would watch how long do they make eye contact when they look away, so they're not, bearing into somebody's soul all the time. Where do they look to? How long do they look away? And I would kind of get that rhythm from social learning and then practice it. And, it's a little awkward as you're acquiring the skills, but
right.
I guess it worked to a certain extent.
I mean, it's kind of like riding a bicycle, right? There's hyper awareness to start. You're like, keep pedaling. And then at some point it becomes more natural. So, as you're practicing these skills, there's hyper awareness, which in itself is awkward for you, like counting how many seconds you're staring at someone's eyes.
Yeah.
But to your point, so how long what's the range of appropriateness? Because I catch myself sometimes like having a conversation with somebody and I realize I'm looking everywhere except at them.
Yes. Yeah. So it's 3.1 seconds for the record. 3.1 on, second off. You can look wherever you want, it turns out. But yeah, that's about the right
3.1 on, 1 off. 3.1 on, 1 off.
That's right. I tell awkward people tend to love details, so I say don't fuss about the 0.1.
Right.
But about 3 to 1 ratio. And it's interesting what you say about finding yourself looking anywhere but the person's eyes. There's actually some research on this where they can do eye tracking studies and actually watch where people are looking when they're looking at somebody's face. And one of the things they find with socially awkward people is that compared to socially fluent people who reflexively look at the eye region, because the eyes contain actually the most social information, awkward people reflexively look to the chin or to the ear, which have much less social information. But what it seems to do is it makes the social interaction less overwhelming, less emotionally overwhelming.
Yeah.
And so it's a way to kind of bring down the intensity of the interaction for the awkward person.
Yeah. So, by the way, just a quick aside, I can't help but realize that for some people listening to this is an extremely awkward conversation.
That's right. I feel like we're on the same wavelength here. If someone's not on that wavelength, they just be
we've lost
do this for research purposes. Yeah,
they're listening to something else. This is for all the awkward people.
That's right.
We can do a demographic study to what our list. We'll see how many people listen to the episode. We can make an unscientific assessment of how many awkward people are because they stuck with it. So here's an interesting question, which is why are people awkward? Because the theory being that I mean, I'm going to completely make stuff up here, but in the realm of evolution, you want the stronger person, the smarter person to be the one who's procreating, and the social person, the socially fluent person is more likely to be sort of have an alpha status and sort of get the better mate, and so the two socially fluent people will procreate and like make. It's got to be good for evolution to be social. For social animals,
sure,
being socially fluent has got to be helpful. So, how did awkward people survive evolution? Like, why are we awkward? Why is there awkwardness?
It's kind of a miracle we're still here.
Yeah,
yeah. I think that's a really interesting lens through which to look at the awkwardness and where it comes from, right? And along with your hypothesis, I think it's really interesting that awkwardness shows pretty strong heritability. So in boys, for example, it's about 53% heritable, and girls about 39% heritable. So there is a significant genetic component there, which suggests it's being passed down, right. Through generations. It's not really clear yet. It's not a slam dunk why awkward people would have not been selected out at some point. But one thought is that there's this curious and strong correlation between social awkwardness and what researchers call extraordinary achievement or striking talent. So, people who achieve amazing things in this world, things that are kind of at the tail end of the bell curve, they're actually more likely to be awkward. And the reason for that, you might say, well, maybe awkward people are more intelligent. That actually doesn't seem to be what accounts for this extraordinary achievement. Instead, what it is is this obsessive interest in things. And so awkward people have this tendency, I say awkward people really love what they love, right? And to the point that they get obsessed with it. They become obsessed with the details and the minutia, and then trying to put those pieces together in different ways. As an example, I heard a great anecdote from a friend of mine, from his wife. And she said, hey, I have a little anecdote for you. Your buddy, who's awkward, one day I walked in and he had taken apart the toaster. And it was just laying there in pieces on the counter. And I said, what are you doing? Is it broken? And he just said, no, I was just really interested in how the pieces worked and how this thing operates as a whole. And that's kind of like the awkward person. When they really love something, they'll just